This past week saw the launch of a website called MormonWikiLeaks, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's a, quote, safe, secure, and anonymous way to submit documents, videos, or any other information regarding the church, unquote. The site was started by Ryan McKnight, a former Mormon himself. In September, he caused a bit of a stir on the ex-Mormon subreddit when he began leaking some internal documents of his own, something I want to ask him about. But let's start out by just saying hi to Ryan. Thank you for joining me. And can you give me some background before we get into all this about your own history with the Mormon Church?
Sure. First I just want to say, Hammond, thank you for inviting me on, and I'm looking forward to see where this discussion goes. So, yeah, fire away at the questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Awesome. So, yeah, what's your story? How did you get involved? You were a Mormon growing up, but I'm specifically curious as to how you left the church and what caused that.
Right. Yeah, I was born into the church, and on my dad's side, I have lineage that goes all the way back to the early days of Mormonism, and I was brought up in a typical Mormon household, and I served a Mormon mission in Barcelona, Spain, and I loved my mission. It was a great experience for me. I was married in the Mormon temple. I lived, the life of an average Mormon, fully believing in the tenets of Mormonism. And when I was 32, which would have been about 3.5 years ago, about summer of 2013, there were some circumstances that kind of caused me to stumble upon the information that Joseph Smith had married teenage brides as part of his polygamy practice. And
that was big news when it came out. I remember reading about that they had discovered, or I think they finally went public with it and admitted that was the case.
Yeah, except that's a great point that you bring that up, because I do know what you're referring to when the church came out with an essay where they formally acknowledged, 30 to 40 wives or whatever it was. This though was before that.
Okay.
So, polygamy is really a taboo subject within Mormonism at this point. You hardly ever hear it discussed in church meetings. And when it does, it's either in very hushed tones or it's in a way that ultimately doesn't really reflect what the reality was. And so for me, when I stumbled across this information about teenage brides, I immediately thought it was, a quote unquote lie of the internet. I knew that Joseph Smith had been a polygamist, but it never had even crossed my mind that he had teenage brides. And as I kind of looked into it more, it became clear to me that this was actually true. And, while the idea of him having teenage brides in and of itself is a disturbing thing to think about, I was actually at the time more shaken up by the fact that I had gone 32 years without knowing this. And, it was almost kind of like, like the cover up is worse than the crime almost.
You never learned about this growing up in the temple or anything like that?
Not a word. I knew that he was a polygamist, but the way polygamy is kind of taught in the undertones, like, first of all, you're very hard pressed to find any contemporary teachings about polygamy and what it was about. Okay. So it's something that the church has gone out of its way to sort of put it in the past, if you will. But when you grow up in the church and anytime it comes up, if somebody asks about it or whatever, usually it's very kind of like, oh, well, just a couple of people did it and they were trying to take care of these poor widows. And, they didn't really want to do it. Joseph Smith resisted it, et cetera. And they make it sound like this thing that really isn't. And
it was like forced upon him in a way.
And you're not even far off when you say that. In fact, and this is something that they do cover in that essay, Joseph Smith, he did it in secret, right? And, at various points he was caught by his wife and other church members and stuff like this. And he would often give the reason as to why he had to do this, because he claimed that an angel appeared to him and threatened to kill him if he did not practice polygamy. And I believe he said that it happened that he resisted the angel 3 times. And on the 3rd or 4th time is when he finally, quote unquote, caved in. and practice polygamy. So it definitely, there was some serious manipulation going on there as to the motivations behind it. And as I began to like dive into the details of polygamy and read early accounts and early journal entries and things of this nature, I began to see that the narrative, the historical narrative that I was getting, was in complete opposition to the narrative that I'd been taught my whole life. And I thought, if I'm wrong about this, what else am I wrong about? And that took me down, the proverbial rabbit hole. Race relations. I mean, I knew that blacks were not allowed to have the priesthood prior to 1978, but I had no idea about how institutionalized the racism was, how vitriolic the rhetoric was that was spewed from the pulpit for over 100 years. I really didn't know the level of hate that was coming out of the leadership. And, these things like disturbed me greatly. And then it kind of took me to then looking at the historicity of the Book of Mormon. And maybe for your listeners that may not know, but Mormons not only refer to the Book of Mormon as being a scriptural text, but they believe it to be historically accurate. In other words, they think that the characters in that book actually existed in real life. And I had always accepted that and believed that there was actually scientific evidence to back that up, because there's a lot of Mormon-based scientists that claim to have all of this evidence of what are called the Nephites and the Lamanites. Those are the people in the Book of Mormon, that they existed. And as I began to critically analyze those things, I quickly realized that I was looking at pseudoscience more than I was real science. And those three things, I would say, are the biggest things that just crushed me. I mean, I could go talking for days about all the details, but
what was the time period like between when you first discovered the polygamy thing, teenage brides, versus to when you decided, you know what, I don't think I can be a Mormon anymore?
Well, I stopped going. I think I probably first started reading stuff in like mid-June of 2013. And the last time I went to church was in September of 2013.
Okay, so a few months.
But yeah, and I mean, obviously early on I started having some serious doubts, but I was trying to make it work. I was trying to find. There was a period of time there where I was convinced that even though all of these things I had discovered were true, I was convinced that there was going to be something I would find that would offer like an explanation to it all, would make it all make sense. And I really sought really hard that explanation for a really good 2 months, I would say. And then that last sort of third month, I was really just sort of coming to terms with the fact that, my life being a Mormon is over. And I tried to go to church a couple times with my wife. We actually had moved during all of this. And so we were now part of a new congregation, a ward, as they call it. Mm-hmm. And so it was all new people. And I kind of started going there just to support her. And I was kind of like, I would stay like in the hallway and stuff and not really participate. And I was going to try to do that long term and just sort of like support her and her desire to go. But after a couple of weeks, like there was like 2 or 3 weeks in, somebody got up at the pulpit and was talking about Joseph Smith. And my wife was aware of all these things I was discovering.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Yeah, and she eventually did leave the church as well. But this guy got up and he was talking about how pure and good and how Joseph Smith was one of the most honest men to ever live. And I started to have, for the first time in my life, like an anxiety attack. Like I started shaking.
Best man in the world, married teenage brides. That sort of a thought.
Yeah. And I told my wife afterwards, I said, I tried and I just don't think I can do it anymore. And luckily, like I'm lucky in that sense, because, a lot of times you do see situations where there's a divorce or things like this. And I got lucky in the sense that, my wife was initially, she was willing to support me in the new direction, even if she was going to continue with the church. And luckily there was never any kind of real serious friction in that area.
Well, that's good to hear. Oh, so you were never a leader in the church. You were just a regular Mormon, lay Mormon, attendee, things like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I never held any leadership outside higher than anything like locally.
So what was your first experience to go from, okay, you're no longer a member of the church. Did you actually formally renounce your membership?
Yes, in approximately,
because I know that's a process for April. A lot of people.
Yeah, I think they've made it easier since then. I actually, to be perfectly honest with you, it wasn't that hard for me to do.
Okay.
But I do know there are plenty of stories of people who get resistance in that area. I guess I maybe got lucky in that. I mean, I did have to still file paperwork, and I think it took about 6 to 8 weeks to fully process. But I never really got any kind of resistance from the leadership, and I think part of it was because we had just moved into a new area, and they kind of knew right off the bat that I was on my way out.
Okay.
So it wasn't like the previous congregation I was with may have given more resistance because I had been there for like almost 10 years, and like I had like real friends there and things like that. So it may have been a different experience, but
okay.
But yeah, it was about April of 2014, I believe, is when that was finalized.
And at what point do you go from you are no longer part of this church to I have access to some of these documents? Because there are a few of them I want to talk about, but when do you start posting stuff online that says this is what's going on inside the church?
So I really fell into this on accident. And, prior to any of this happening, I was just your average forum participator in various forums that I would, use Reddit or some Facebook groups as a place to sort of express myself and, seek the comfort of like-minded people who have gone through the same type of trauma that I had gone through, type of thing. And back in November of 2015, in a private Facebook group that I was in, somebody posted about this new policy that was being rolled out that day. I think it was the day of the release, or it might have been the day after. Mm-hmm. And it's something that later became dubbed, the November policy, which it's kind of a long drawn out thing. But what it boils down to is that the children of homosexual couples are not allowed to be baptized until they meet 2 criteria. 1, they must be 18 or older, and number 2, they must renounce the same-sex union of their homosexual parents. And this was I saw it as being a really huge step for the church, although they've never supported homosexuality or LGBT issues, they've always tried to toe it as much of a neutral line as possible.
Right. They usually say it's fine if you're gay, you just can't, you have to be celibate. And this was actually punishing the kids for something they had nothing to do with unless they denounced their parents, basically.
Well, and I'll even take that a step further. There are 13 tenets in the Mormon Church that are referred to as the Articles of Faith. And the very second and these are supposedly, the core beliefs of the Mormon Church. And the second article of faith, and they're pretty much in order of importance. So we're talking about like the second most important tenet of the faith is, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it verbatim. It's been a long time since I've recited it, but it's something along these lines. Man will be punished for their own sins and not for the transgressions of Adam, something along those lines. And the interpretation always is that we are our own men, and we are not punished for our parents, for their parents and their parents and their parents, all the way back to the sin of Adam and Eve eating the fruit. We are punished for our own sins only. And here it appears that people are being punished for the sins of their parents.
Right.
So I actually, to be perfectly honest with you, I was quite skeptical that this was a real policy. And so I hadn't read about it anywhere else. And so I posted it on Reddit, on the ex-Mormon subreddit. And then I also posted it on a more public Facebook group. And essentially I was really just seeking some confirmation. I didn't know at the time that I was stumbling upon this bombshell. And I basically, to make a long story short, through somebody who's in the ex-Mormon community who had media connections, it made it to the Utah media, which then it led up to the New York Times covered it, and it became a big story. And although my name was not necessarily attached to the media coverage on that, the person who I took it to, who took it to the media, went online and gave me credit as being the leaker. Now, the reality is the reason he didn't give credit to the person who I found it from is because at the time that person wanted to stay anonymous.
I got you.
They have since come out. They have since come out and attached their name to it. But I kind of got dubbed as the leaker because of my involvement and my willingness to have my name attached to it. And after that happened, I would get contacted like about once a month from like church employees or former employees that felt they had something to get out there. And, sometimes it would be like something that was not as interesting as they thought it was, or sometimes it was something very interesting that they didn't have proof of. And then sometimes there would be something that was worth putting out there, and I would put it out there, but nothing that really was like super newsworthy.
But you're the guy they're going to because they want to leak stuff, and so they know, okay, I can trust this guy. He won't rat me out or anything like that.
I kind of built up this reputation of that initially on Reddit. And so then I got contacted in the beginning of October, by somebody who says they have these video they want that they've been sitting on for years, they said, and been looking for an opportunity to get them out without being attached to them because they were breaking a non-disclosure agreement by sharing these videos. And I said, yeah, okay, let's, I'll put them on YouTube. Yeah, why not, And, he sent them to me and I watched them. I said, okay, I said, okay, these are interesting. I didn't know how interesting they were to people on the outside, because I sometimes struggle to gauge, like, how much would a non-Mormon like find this interesting? Like, how much inside baseball is this?
Right. I mean, they were almost, this was like a board meeting, but to be clear, this was a meeting of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, which for non-Mormons, I mean, that's the second highest governing body in the church. So this is pretty high up there, but it was essentially like a board meeting that they had internally, right?
Yes, they were closed door meetings that they have them, from what I've learned later, apparently these are meetings that occur once a week. And they get briefed on various different subjects. And these were essentially videos of some of those briefings. And at the end of each briefing, there's always sort of a Q&A where if the 12 apostles want to get some clarification on something the briefer said, and that's where all of the interesting stuff happens. So just so if anybody from this podcast, the channel that they're on is called MormonLeaks. And if you look at the first 15 videos posted to that channel chronologically, those are the 15 videos. There are some videos that are on there that were posted after that are not necessarily part of that leak package, so I don't want people to get confused. But
and some of these videos, they got a briefing from a sitting U.S. senator at the... What year was this going on? The videos themselves?
Okay, yeah. Yeah. Well, the videos span between, I want to say 2010, 2011, and just one point of clarification. Yeah. The video you're referring to, which was with Gordon Smith, the former senator from Oregon, that briefing actually occurred like a month after he left office.
Okay, so he wasn't a sitting U.S. senator then. But yeah, they were getting information from a senator. They were discussing things like marijuana policy, the 2008 elections, which on the surface, okay, whatever, you're getting information. But when this came out, what were people really focusing on?
There were two main videos that got national attention. I guess I'll address the senator one first because you just mentioned it. The reason why the senator one raised eyebrows was because there were a couple of themes that were very evident in this video. And one of them was that it was talked about how his staff, when he was a senator, he used a word called church broke, which is kind of like a horse being broke, like the trained. And they basically was said that they didn't do anything until they got direction from the church. And he even kind of made an offhanded joke, something to the effect of, we went at one point, we went like 2 months without hearing from you guys and we didn't know what to do. And
by the way, he was a senator from which state? He wasn't from Utah.
No, and that's an important distinction, because if he was from Utah, he was from Oregon. But if he was from Utah, you could almost forgive him and say, well, most of his constituents are probably Mormon, so right. They're probably in line with the church. But here, I don't know what percentage of Oregon is Mormon, but I'm guessing it's well under 1%.
Right.
And so, and he also just talked, another thing that got big headlines was out of that video was he said that he voted for the Iraq War because he felt that the church would benefit from bringing democracy to the Iraqis, and the church could, bring Mormonism to them. And I think even for people who support the Iraq War, recognize that that's no reason to be going to war. And another thing that he said is that his temple recommend, which is sort of basically means he's a card, he's allowed to go into the temple and all this stuff. He's pays his tithing. He's basically a card carrying Mormon, is more important to him than his election certificate for being in the Senate.
Usually these politicians, they put their hand on a holy book and swear to uphold the Constitution, and he's basically going the other way.
Yeah, exactly. And there's another video on my YouTube channel that I think people would find interesting. It's probably chronologically posted immediately after the 15 main videos. And I think the name of it is something like Jeffrey Holland Caught Lying to Harvard Students. And Jeffrey Holland is one of the 12 apostles, and he was in all of these meetings. And this video splices together audio from that video, the closed door meeting, and some audio. It's only an audio video, but it's audio from that meeting and then audio from a meeting where he talked to students at Harvard. And he explicitly was telling these students that the Mormon Church never tries to influence politicians on specific policy issues, and that no Mormon politician would be expected to put the church first. And he goes on and on and on about this. And so the video kind of splices the two together. And I've got the original videos linked in the comments so people can make sure I'm not taking out of context.
So clearly hypocrisy, we're seeing the hypocrisy right then and there.
And well, I would say so.
Yeah.
And the other video that made a lot of headlines, more comical than anything. There's a video, I think the title of it is something like in which they obsess over Chelsea Manning's sexuality. And by the way, if people are like wondering how I got these, most of the titles of the videos, I kind of like used Arrested Development, that TV show, as an inspiration.
Yeah.
So I'm a fan of that show.
It's like Friends. This is the one where they talk about blank. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, in this video, they go, the briefing is about WikiLeaks, which is ironic with what's going on right now. But this video the debriefing happened in 2010 or 11, back when the episode of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning was on the forefront of the news. And the person giving the briefing is basically telling the quorum of the 12 apostles, like, the dangers of a WikiLeaks type website as related to the church, and could a WikiLeaks or a WikiLeaks type website hurt the church, etc. It was actually very important and
tragic foreshadowing.
Briefing. Yeah. And as sort of a subtext of the briefing, and as a way to give some background on the whole thing, he tells them about Julian Assange and Bradley Manning. They refer to him as Bradley Manning in the video. And that whole, he gives like a little synopsis of that whole issue about Bradley Manning leaking stuff to Julian Assange. And it wasn't it was not the subject of the briefing. It was just sort of subtext. Well, when they get to the Q&A section, instead of asking him about what they can do to prevent a WikiLeaks type thing happening and all this stuff, the only thing they literally talk about is the sexuality of Bradley Manning, and then speculate about the sexuality of Julian Assange. And they say things like, one of them says, well, it's my understanding that Bradley Manning is a confirmed homosexual. That's their word, not mine. Mm-hmm. And then one of them says, is that actually true? And he asks the briefer, is he a confirmed homosexual? And then the briefer says, yes, it's my understanding that he's a homosexual. And then one of them says, is Julian Assange a homosexual? And the briefer says, I really don't know one way or the other. And then you can almost kind of see the briefer try to pivot them back to on subject.
We're not talking about this, right? We're talking about something else.
Yeah, but he's unsuccessful. Okay. And then I think the best line of the whole thing, there's one of the apostles by the name of Dallin Oaks says something to the effect of, the reason why I'm so concerned about this is because I'm convinced that the media actively covers up any negative information about the homosexual agenda. And so, whatever all of that means.
Right.
And so, they're what it tells, and, Mormons see that video and they've commented as much, and they see nothing wrong with that. They're like, oh, that seems like a normal course of conversation. But what they don't realize is, to a normal person outside of the context of Mormonism, they see this as a bunch of 80-plus-year-old men running a multiple billion-dollar company that are completely out of touch with reality.
Right.
And
they're
there was
fully
another one,
obsessed with this sexual issue that they don't really understand, at the expense of discussing something that might matter to the Mormon Church.
Well, that's the most irony about it, is that it was actually a serious subject, and the person who gave the briefing was actually prepared a fairly well done and important briefing for them.
So,
go ahead.
No, let me get back to the question from the beginning then, which is, in a more broad sense, you post all these videos online. There's a lot of discussion about these videos, specifically the parts that you're mentioning. Do people know this is you at this point? I mean, because you put it under, like you said, the name of the YouTube channel is MormonLeaks. Do people know it's you at this point?
Yeah. Yes. And the New York Times covered it, and they did a piece about me when that happened, and my name was all over the media. Unlike with the November policy, my name was not in the media. The only way people knew that I was attached to that was if they kind of followed the issue on Reddit.
Okay.
But yeah, with the videos at this point, I decided to go ahead and embrace that role.
And now you really are the guy to talk to if people have leaks.
Well, I got bombarded with messages after the videos.
So after you post these videos, what happens? Well,
I got bombarded. Like my once a month on average phone call, all of a sudden I'm getting like 15, 20 phone calls, I really, to be honest with you, I've lost track of how many different people I've talked to, but I've kind of ballparked the number in the 25 to 30 number range. And, sometimes nothing comes out of it. I've gotten a couple of things, like I released, since the video, I've released there was an internal document that showed the average cost of all of the interior decorations of the temple. And there's some, obviously it's all very expensive, but there's some that are really, really expensive that kind of caught people's eye. They were like, wow, I can't believe they spend that much money on that stuff. But, nothing that rose to the news worthy level of the videos. But I would talk to people who really had stuff they wanted to give me, and they were hesitant because of their anonymity. And it wasn't so much that they didn't trust me, but they were worried about maybe the church or somebody hacking my computer and figuring it out. And so I had already, prior to the videos, had been toying with the idea of a website, but this overwhelming response that I got and the clear demand that I felt there was kind of put the fire under me to actually start doing it. And so I put together a team, and we worked really hard for 2.5 months, and the website is the result of that.
And so the website is MormonWikiLeaks.org, I believe. And .com. I'm sorry. So MormonWikiLeaks.com. And if you go there, there are actually instructions to say, here's how you download a Tor browser. Here's how you access the dark web. Here's how you could send us stuff without your name being attached to it. You kind of very clearly lay it out for people so that they are sure that their anonymity will be protected. Yeah,
because, this kind of world is new to Mormons in a way. Mormons are not naturally versed in this secretive movement on the internet. And so, we wanted to make sure that, number one, they knew exactly how to do it. And number two, they had a little bit of peace of mind that we were doing it right.
Mm-hmm. And so if people email you, let's say they had a document inside the church, they go through the process and submit it to the website. Who gets it? Just you?
Yes.
Okay. And here's a question I was trying to figure out. Let's say someone sends you a document. Let's say it is explosive. And I don't know if that's happened yet, or maybe it will happen in the future. But how do you verify that these things are real? Can't someone trick you if they wanted to?
Absolutely. And I fully expect people to try to do that. I don't want to go into too much detail about the authentication process. Here's what I'll say.
Yeah.
First of all, we're fully expecting that to happen. And we will not release anything unless we feel comfortable with its authenticity. We do have processes in place to help with the identification process. And I'm confident at this point that the processes that we've laid out will be effective. I suppose time will tell on that. But it is something that is going to be on the forefront of anything that gets released. And obviously, the more explosive, the higher the burden is going to be.
Sure.
So I don't know. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I really don't want to get too much into the details of how we're going to do it. Just know that it's being done.
There is
and
a process.
We want to make sure. Yes, and it's not me relying on my gut feeling.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good to know. Let me ask you, what is something, there may be two parts to this question. The first is, what does the church knowingly keep hidden from the public that even Mormons know, oh, yeah, I don't have access to this information?
Well, the answer to that would be finances.
Okay, so even church members don't actually know where their tithes are going necessarily?
They have no clue.
Okay. And so one question for me.
Zero information given.
Okay. And is this also the case for like leaders of the wards? I mean, how high up do people not know about the finances?
Very high up. Even most church employees don't know enough to give you a big picture. It is maintained within a very, very small circle of people. And even then, the information is so fragmented that I would say it's likely that there's no one person that could give you a complete picture of their finances.
Yeesh. And maybe this is answering that question, but if the greatest whistleblower in the Mormon Church history used your site, what in your mind what would be the ultimate discovery? What would you love to know?
Well, I do think there's interest in, the finances, and I am interested in that. But I people think that the fine is going to lead to the discovery of shady behavior, et cetera, maybe lose their tax-exempt status. I do think that's kind of like pie-in-the-sky thinking. I've seen evidence that the church goes out of their way to follow IRS regulations, and if I had to guess, I would say they probably aren't doing anything illegal when it comes to finances, but that doesn't mean that they're operating ethically. And even if they are operating ethically, people just don't know. So it would be nice to just know. And the other area would be things like policies and procedures at the corporate level. Most people don't know what they are, and they're supporting this organization financially. And then, I think some of the other things that I think could potentially come out, and I don't have any proof that any of this would exist, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get information regarding, let's say, the cover-up of sexual abuse and things like that. Because we do know there's a lot of sexual abuse that goes on, but, it's unclear as to the extent that the Mormon Church goes to cover it up.
Okay. Do you think there's any possibility that there's ever been any discussion at the high levels that maybe some aspects of the Mormon history that you are all taught growing up, that maybe at the highest levels they know it's not true?
Yeah, that's always a fun topic to discuss on Reddit and things like that. At the end of the day, nobody really knows. We can't really call for the operation of their minds. But I find it personally, I find it hard to believe that you could rise to the level of, let's say, the 12 apostles and still believe. But with all the information you have access to. But, I really don't know. I suppose we have to give them the benefit of the doubt until we have proof otherwise.
This may be confidential information, but can you say anything about how many people in the week that the site's been up, how many people have used the site? How many emails have you received through the site?
Well, as far as how many people visit the site, I can't even give you that information if I wanted to, because one of the features of the site is that it doesn't log any information about visitors.
Okay.
So we don't even know how many people are visiting the site. We have received files.
Okay.
But as to their value of these files, it hasn't been determined yet. I just haven't had a chance to fully vet them.
Okay.
So I couldn't even tell you leaks are coming. I just know that I've got work to do this weekend. And I'm also in touch with a couple people that have contacted me outside of the website, and I think that they're going to. I think there's a good chance that these contacts lead to leaks. But, people should also be reminded that this is a slow process. This isn't something that happens overnight.
Right. I mean, the important thing is that there is now a place to go if you are someone who is maybe in the church and has access to information and you didn't know what to do with it. There's at least now publicly a place for you to go where you can take that information if you wanted to. What do you say to critics? Because I've seen this on, there was a Washington Post article about Mormon WikiLeaks and other places. What do you say to critics who say, you're not a Mormon anymore, Ryan, so just stop messing with those of us who are? Yeah,
I think the way it usually goes is they try to use a condescending line that says something like, "You can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone."
Mm-hmm.
And look, I've talked about this a little bit in other forums, and I want to talk about it here too. I have trouble even offering a response to that kind of criticism because to me it is so lacking in substance. Because the implication of that statement or that sentiment is that the normal behavior of a person who leaves a religion that they've dedicated 30 plus years to that the normal reaction would be to just sort of turn it off like a light switch and move on to the next chapter in their lives. The implication is that would be the normal reaction. And I would question a person that reacted like that to such an event in their lives. How can somebody, and I got lucky 30 plus years. There's people 40, 50, 60 years that they were involved before they came to these realizations. But you're dedicating your energy, your thoughts, your life, your money, your future plans all revolve around this religion that you come to find out is not what it claims to be. How could anybody walk away from something like that?
Yeah, I almost want to say to them, like, what are you afraid of? Like, worst case scenario, everything's fine and you have nothing to fear. But if there really is some secret to be uncovered, wouldn't you want to know about it?
Yeah, and I'm open to things that are previously unknown that would shed a positive light on the church. I'm open to that. Of course, if there was anything positive, they would have shared that because they never hesitate to share positive things.
Actually, that is a question. If people share stuff with you, is there any way of knowing, like, what percent you're actually sharing with the public? What if someone shared something with you and it never sees the light of day? Like, it's kind of, it's a bottleneck that goes through you. So do we ever know that people submitted these secrets that portray the church in a good light or anything,
I guess it would rest on my trustworthiness. I mean, I am definitely open to saying things like, I've received 100 documents and only released 10 of them. I'm open to that kind of a discussion, but at the end of the day, you're trusting my word for it. I would say this though, is that, if people either try to get something through me and I reject it, or they don't want to go through me, they don't need to. I mean, I'm a resource, but if people want to go about it a different way, or they don't trust me or whatever, then by all means, I mean, I've got a pretty good track record and I've got the media contacts, I think, to sort of get it out there in a more effective way. But, by no means does anybody have to go through me. And also, I would say I'm not encouraging any specific leaks. I mean, I'm not saying make sure you find me this or that or whatever. I basically here's what I want. I want if an employee of the Mormon Church comes across through their daily life information that they feel that their conscience tells them that the public would benefit from it, and it eats at them to the point that they're willing to share it. I just want those people to know that there is a resource out there for them if they want assistance.
That's good to know. And one final question for you. Let's say you are one of the apostles. Let's say you are a quorum member. If you're in leadership in the Mormon Church, what do you do to fight this? What advice would you give them if you weren't you? Like, how do you go against these people who might leak information about your organization?
I think one of the first step they need to do is recognize, and I don't think they do this yet, that the level of loyalty among their employees is nowhere near the levels they think it is. I think that upper management thinks that they have a very loyal workforce. And my experience, and I'm not just talking about the 25 to 30 people I've talked to, these people tell me that there are small pockets of people there that don't believe. There's a wink, wink, nod, nod in the hallway. People are faking it all over the place there. And these are just the people I know about. I can only imagine if you extrapolate it, from a percentage standpoint. But I would estimate, in my opinion, that there's at a minimum hundreds of disloyal employees, and at a max, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was in the thousands. And by disloyal, I don't mean people that would be willing to leak information, because I actually know some people that are no longer believing in the church that won't leak stuff because they don't want to break their
who had access to stuff, but they're not going to give it to you.
But But when I say disloyal, I just mean that they are closet non-believers in the religion.
Because, I mean,
And the church,
if they actually wanted to leave the church and not pay the tithes and everything, I mean, and we experience this with anyone leaving any religion, really, they're basically giving up their lives, their social networks, maybe their families. They don't want to do that, so they just play the game.
in many cases, it's social and professional suicide.
Yeah. So the church the church elders, the people at the highest levels may not realize how many people play that game. They may not have any idea. They think they're more loyal than
My opinion is it's greatly underestimated by them.
Well, we'll find out based on how many leaks people are willing to give you, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just remind people, I said it before, that this is a slow game. Patience is the game, and there will be leaks that come out. I have no doubt of it. And how big or how newsworthy they are, I guess time will tell. But there are things that are going to come out in the coming months.
I'm looking forward to it, and I'm sure a lot of people are. Ryan, can you tell everyone if they do want to send you information, what's the best way to do it again? The website is
MormonWikiLeaks.com, and there is an email at the bottom that I use, a Proton mail. And if they want to send me an email from a fake email account or their real email account, if they want to have a dialogue with me, they can email me there. But you can definitely just use the site as a complete anonymous submission if you want.
Very cool. And thank you for creating that resource for people. And I know I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to come from that. So, and I know a lot of people are too.
And if I could just add
Please.
One aspect of the site that I've gotten a lot of questions about, like, oh, I can't see the documents and the videos on the site. We don't have the hosting feature yet up on the site, but it's coming. In January, we plan to roll out the hosting ability on the site. So right now, we're using YouTube and we're using other sort of document sharing sites to host the documents. But sometime in January, we'll have everything accessible on the website. So right now, the website is simply for the submission function.
And if there is something that comes about, how do you announce that? Where will you be posting that? Just on the WikiLeaks website? Will you get it through the media, the subreddit?
Yeah, well, the media would probably be involved depending on how big it is. But our main platform for releasing right now, we're using the public Facebook page, but we're also following that up with a tweet and Reddit and things like that. But the first place we will post it will be on the public Facebook page. That's also titled Mormon.
It's also titled Mormon WikiLeaks. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to us, and good luck. Good luck with the endeavor.
Thank you very much.